You would have had to try hard to take a harder seat on that bench.
Well,
With no access.
it doesn't matter whether it's a hard seat or a soft seat, I still have problems. Just in case anyone forgets who I am, I put the shirt on.
That's in case you forget who you are.
Well, that's very
I'm
possible.
here to catch flying pieces.
All right, nothing's gonna fly, I promise, I hope. Okay, most of you know that I have been a collector for quite a number of years and I looked the other day, I have approximately 200 of these blanks yet. And so I was trying to figure out things that we could do with them. And there is a box over here for you to take with you, as many of them as you want.
Those are ash, is there a color?
I don't know what they are. It's I don't think it's ash, but I'm not positive.
So it's not ash for
Is it
sure.
gum?
I think it's gum.
Could be a gum, yes.
Black gum.
And it turns very, very nice. It's a nice, easy wood to turn. The neat thing about these things for the project I'm going to do, this was, I think, they're blanks for pepper mills. But with this top up here, it fits perfect in my PSI chuck. So instead of having to take a piece of wood and make a spindle turning out of it and put a tenon on it, well, mine already has a tenon on it. So all I have to do is mount it in the lathe. Or in the chuck. So that's what we're going to start with today, is this blank. And the neat thing, I know Mark and Jerry were on the other night with the LAW, Lancaster Area Wood Turners Group. And Judy, I didn't notice whether you were there for Richard Graffin's presentation or not. He's in Australia, originally from England. And when he started turning and selling his product, he turned scoops. And I didn't realize this. I planned this a month ago, what I was going to do. And so the first time I'd really watched any of his work was last Wednesday evening. He hasn't turned very many scoops, but he has turned a few and sold them. He said he originally thought he'd turned 40,000. But he checked that and he's only turned 32,000. Yes, and he said that's the way he made a living. It's just amazing. Now, the wood scoops or the scoops that he turned don't have a long handle on them. Their handle's real short and stubby, like about this length and more rounded. But and any configuration you'd want. The neat thing about the scoop is that you can customize it in any way you want. This one has a straight handle on it. The contour is OG shaped with a longer part down on the bottom. Where this one has the straight cut on it and the handle is mounted on the top. So this is an offset turning. Then the one I'm going to turn today is, well, eventually one of the sections anyway. It's going to have the handle start at the top and come down to the middle. So just a different configuration, but a nice straight cut across here, and you still get the scoop effect. Or you can do the OG shape, and the OG shape in a couple of different ways. This is OG with the long spout. This one is a little bit different configuration. So a neat little project that you can try to make and be creative with it. The other thing is I thought, well, now what else can we do with this technique or this idea? And I thought of Pam and her bells. She makes bells and they look similar to this, except they don't have this cutout and they're curved around more on the top, but they do have a nice little handle on the top too. And then I thought, well, what about a wine glass? You could make a wine glass out of it. So a lot of different ideas. So I'm not going to do so much turning today as I am talking about different techniques you can incorporate in your turnings or ways that you can make your turnings. So first thing, I need to mount my piece in the chuck. I've already started this one. This is just the basic shape on the outside, but I started drilling it out. Now you can turn this out if you want, but I'm being the lazy person that I am. I decided the quickest way is just to drill it. So I step drilled it. This probably has 3 holes in it. Started with a small bit and keep working up. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go up 2 more steps and then we can turn the outside a little bit. So when I go to mount this, I will stick it in the chuck and it's semi-resting here in the follow or the steady rest. But before I mount it in the chuck, I'm going to hold it back into the chuck as far as I can and align it. And one of the things that I've done, I've had this for quite a number of years, the standard center won't fit in that opening. So what I did, I made another adapter. It fits over the chuck, over the center. And now I have an enlarged center that'll hold my piece. Okay, so let me stick this in. Lock the tailstock. Put some pressure in it. Now I'm centered on that chuck. Now all I have to do is tighten the jaws on the chuck. Tighten the jaws up. And that was the other thing I tried to figure out. You know, if you try to turn this now without a steady rest, it's very difficult to keep it in alignment. It's going to want to move around, wobble. So that's the reason for the steady rest. The steady rest, very simplistic, just a piece of plywood with 2x4 down on the base, a couple diagonals on it here. I think if I were to do it again, I'd probably make these diagonals down, go down both directions, get a little more stability out of it. It's just a little bit on the wobbly side. Could be a heavier piece of material too. Snug it back in for a second, snug it, and these are, if you're not familiar with them, these are skateboard tires. They really work great because they're a very soft neoprene, and they have bearings in them, and they'll follow this contour around real well. Stop here a second. Running fine that way. Now I can pull the tailstock away. I do like to check to make sure I have pressure against all 3 wheels. Back the center out. I'll lay it down there and forget where I put it in a few minutes. Take a Forstner bit. In this case, it's an adaptation of the Forstner bit. It's a multi-spur. I'm going to leave it back here most of the way. Make sure it isn't touching when you start. I like to hold on to the chuck just because of a little support. Now, feel free to ask any questions at any time you want. I do need to say that this next bit that I'm going to put in here, and this is another sort of a little idea for the future, especially if you're doing bowls and you want to put a tenon or a mortise on the bottom of your bowl, and you want to put it in without the tip of the bit protruded, especially if you do one of these from each side of the bowl, one on the base and one on the inside. Those tips have a tendency to touch one another and you have a hole in the bottom of your bowl. And most of you, well, several of you know Jim House or knew Jim House. Jim told me this quite a number of years ago. He says, well, yeah, that's no problem, grind it off. I said, Jim, if you grind that center point off, the bit's not going to run in the center of your work. He says, oh, yes, it will. He was a machinist. And he says, oh, yes, it will. And it does. It works fine. So on a number of my bits, I've just ground that bottom off, that center point. And it does. It works really well. All right. So, see, I knew I'd lose things right there. So we'll go up one more size. Neat thing about this project, it can be any size you want to make it. You want to make it for sugar scoop, you know, a real small sugar scoop, for herbs, whatever you want to use it for. So it can be, you can take a dowel rod, a 1-inch dowel rod, and make it out of that. And you can calculate how much volume it's actually going to hold, so that you always have that as a measuring device. I know when I told Fred what I was going to do here, he says, well, now you're going to do that all on the lathe? I said, yeah. I remember Bob showed us how to make a nice little scoop. Again, I didn't want to take that much time to have to make up a fixture to turn it around sideways to bore that center of like a spoon. If you don't step drill with these bits especially, you get an awful lot of burning. This is one of those high dollar sets. Must be about 20 bits in it for $35. Can't expect them to do that. Now when you get to the bottom, you start drilling where this is. Now, take a little more force. South went in, working to get that little tip out of the bottom. Because the previous bit still had the center point. Just a little push. Get a little smoke out of there. Now, the disadvantage of this particular technique, if you look at the bottom of the scoop, it has a square bottom. A good wood turner wouldn't leave that square bottom in there. He'd take a tool and go in there and clean that out, put a nice little dip down in it so that it's hollowed out more. But since I don't consider myself a wood turner, I'm not going to do that. This is another advantage of this particular lathe. It has a real long spindle in here, so you have quite a bit of distance to it. All right, so that pretty well takes care of boring it. So the next thing I need to do is take the steady rest out of here. Work on the end, and sanding. To sand it, and I would leave it in there in the steady rest to sand it. There it is. Dowel rod, split on the end on the bandsaw, piece of abrasive, set it inside. let it spin. Sand it out. Like we were saying, we don't want to spend too much time sanding. All right, everything on this rest is handmade, just a little block of aluminum and a bolt. All right. Now, back to my center. And let's turn down. What's the diameter on the outside? I don't know. I'm just going to turn it down. I'm watching the end for my wall thickness. I'm going to take it down to where it's a reasonable size, but not too small a diameter, too thin. And I'm going to use my small roughing gouge here to mark that I made it to the shop here a number of years ago. So now I'll turn down to the diameter one. From this point, I could go ahead and sand it and lay it out in such a way that I want to make sure that when I start turning my handle on it, that I don't cut into the hollow part. So what I would do is to measure it with very expensive depth gauge. So now I know where that distance is. A little mark here. And I've been leaving about a ½ an inch of thickness. So put my mark on, transfer it all the way around, and this part over here becomes a handle. What is the size of the handle? Whatever it turns in. I always like to talk about one of my former students that now has her own business and teaches at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. And I always told her when she was in my high school shop class that you need to measure, you have a drawing, you work toward that drawing, and everything is very precise. And she blew me out of the water here one day when she told me that I don't use dimensions anymore. You just make it, and whatever turns out, it turns out. So I've used her idea ever since. Okay, so now we've turned the hollow part. Next thing, let's turn the handle. Well, it just so happens, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. This one's even sanded. Yeah, use the center to align it. Pull it into the chuck. Tighten it up. Now, I've had pretty good success with this Penn State Industries chucks. They're not the greatest. They work all right. If I were going to buy a new one, I've been watching a lot of the videos on the chucks, and I think Max Minister would probably be the way to go. I know Jerry has one. I think that's the way to go. But once you start with a brand, you pretty well have to stick with it because it's out of hand, they have too many different kinds of chunks here. Okay, so I've already started the handle here. Like I said before, this is about a 1/2 inch of thickness right at this point. So I do know that when I go to cut my taper in here, however I want to do it, then I don't come back too far. So let's work on that handle just a bit. I think this rest is going to be a little too big. And I'm just going to take a small 3/8 gouge here. Work on this just a little. And you can see just a little bit of run out in it. Back from my experience in machining, something you should do when you take a piece out of the chuck, before you actually take it out of the chuck, you look around. Your chucks are your jaws are always numbered. So you should find number 1 jaw. And once you find number 1 jaw, then you put a mark on your piece of wood in the center of that number 1 jaw. Now, when you go to mount it back in, you mount it back in that jaw. And if there's any difference in the jaws themselves, you're going to be right back in position. I didn't do that. So let's go from here. All right, this handle is straight. This is in the center of the piece. So what I'm going to do is just turn it a little bit here. Still roughing it. I could use a longer gouge, a larger gouge. Close to the diameter that I want. And of course, using this skew or the skew in the correct way, scraping. Whatever size you want to. I'm simply using this as a scraper. I should have my negative rate scraper. Hear a clumping sound there. Pushing it slightly out now. Okay, you get the idea. Turn the handle to shape. Next, let's take this back out and go another way. They don't like to leave they tighten the rods or the Tommy bars in place when I'm working on the lathe for fear I'll accidentally turn it on and they'll go flying. So that's pretty much in the shape. So what if we go another way? This time, this is the one that we're going to do at an angle. The handle is going to be in the center here, or close to the center here, and come up at an angle. So to do that, we have to go back between centers, or go to between centers. Disadvantage of my chucks, they're 1" 8. This is 1¼ 8. So you have to put an adapter on it. So in order to use the number 2 Morse taper on the inside, you have to take the adapter off. Now I can put a center in. Right? And now I can either take this one out of here, or I could use another one. So now I have just a conventional center. All right, now to do this offset, what I'm going to do from the midpoint here, I'm going to come off 3/8 of an inch. And if you notice, I have a line drawn down through here. I did that when it was in the lathe, in between centers. So I have a nice straight line. Now, the other thing I've done, I've made a plug. And the plug has the center point, plus it has a 3/8 offset. So when I turned the one handle that was completely straight but offset from the center, then I used the offset point in the plug and the offset point to the headstock. But this time, because this one is going to be a little different, it's going to be tapering down, I can put the plug back in. I don't actually have to align it because I'm going to be using the center here and the offset up here. And that's not true. I'm doing it the opposite. I'm going to use the offset down here and the center up here. Never fails whenever you're doing a demonstration. You always screw something up. As many times as you've done it before, it doesn't matter. You'll still mess up. Always turn your lathe off before you make adjustments. Was that good as I say, not as I do? And again. The reason I picked up the 3/8 to use it is because when you first start turning, if you use a larger gouge, you find that it really bounces around an awful lot. But the smaller gouge seems to work real well. So now I can go back up to 5/8 in this case. I've already turned a portion of it. idea what I'm doing here. Need to continue on with this. All right, next thing. We need to make the scoop part. And something that I happened to see on a video was, how do you hold, and this has always been a concern of my safety, how do you hold a piece that's round and cut it on the bandsaw? So, neat thing is just get hot glue. Let it warm. Maybe. So in this case, this particular one has a round handle on it. I didn't finish turning it, didn't finish sanding it, so this is just going to be a rough example. But to do this, you need to figure out your design, exactly how you're going to make this cut. And the nice thing about a center handle, it doesn't matter where you do that on the piece here. So you turned me and I wasn't quite ready. The whole idea of me putting this here was so I could watch it and see if I was doing what I was supposed to be doing or have it lined up, but I wasn't. So if it's an offset handle, then you have to make sure you make your cut in the right location. With this handle and coming into the center, the cut can be anywhere you want. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to a little bit of hot glue on the end, a little bit of hot glue down here on the bottom, and set it in position on this block of wood. Now when I go to run it through, as long as the block of wood stays straight, it's not going to move on me. So you always have to keep in mind you want to do this as safely as possible. Well, let's see if this is enough to work. So just hold it in position for a few moments. Now you take the pencil and make your design. So in this case, I'm going to allow this to curve. Straight down. You can't see what I'm drawing on here, but I'll turn it. So, and you still can't see well. Okay. One like that. Drop the glue right here. All right, so I've made my drawing up here on the top. And now I'm going to set it in the bandsaw and make the cut as soon as the glue sets. It isn't setting well. Interesting. Another one of those goof ups. Trying to do too much too fast. Usually what I do is I put the glue on it and let it set for a little bit. Try and brush it a little bit in the demonstration. All right, so I just put a little extra glue around the outside. Still hasn't quite set. Questions about what we're doing? Quick cut here. We'll be in business. And again, this cut can be in any shape you want. Mark, do we need to move that other camera over here?
Pretty good shot. You want that over the camera?
No, that's just.
Now, as far as the hot melt glue,
It just peels off.
Towards it, until it's not, towards the headstone.
So I can just peel it off. Takes a little bit of effort, but it comes off. Doesn't seem to affect the wood in any way. Just peel it. And on the back side, you don't have to worry about it back here because you can cut that one off. So I just take a little Japanese saw and cut it off. A little bit of sanding here, a bit of sanding back here. Okay. So, well, the way I would do it, because it's not too smart, you see, I would fill the scoop up and pour it into a container that I knew the size of it. You know, like a cup or half a cup or whatever. That sounds pretty good.
I like your curve artistic.
Yeah. The curve is neat. Like I say, you don't have to do it. You just take a handsaw and make a straight cut if you want. There are lots of
For
these.
punishment, you could even use a coping saw and cut the curve.
Oh, yeah, you could, but I'm not.
if you got a week,
No, not with a sharp blade. The walls are pretty thin.
Yeah. So feel free to take as many of these as you want. And if somebody wants more, I have lots.
Good project.
And the other thing, down the lower garage, I have blanks, I have walnut blanks, I have cherry blanks, and I have 2 large hickory blanks. So if anyone is interested in taking those, they're green. And I purposely put the dandy roll out here because this is something I think is really neat that happens. When you turn a green bowl, you get this undulating surface. So I thought that kind of interesting. What's that? Oh, I was talking to the group rather than to the camera.
Is that a once turned bowl?
Yes. Yeah, that's the reason it ended up with that shape. If you go with twice turned, you probably won't have the undulation.
Turn that.
But yeah, and the other thing is that when you turn green, you want to turn a fairly thin rim. Otherwise, it'll check on you. Now, all the blanks that I have down there, I cut the pith out, so there's no pith in any of them. So they should be ready to go to mount on the lathe. And there's, I don't know how many I've cut. There's a 50 down there probably. Ready to go. Bob, or yeah, Fred came over and yeah, he and his dad, and they took a whole truckload of wood and I'd like for you, if you would, take any of these all the time. You tell me what size you want, I'll cut them up just to get you to take them. And like I said, the blanks are down there if you want any blanks. Because there's more there than I'll ever turn. Yeah. And I'd like to get more.
Good demo. Good demo.
Somebody demoed this years ago when we were in Ray's shop. I don't know whether you remember who did.
I remember we did it. No.
But I was just intrigued with it, fascinated by it, so that's why.
They went out and made 200 blanks.
No. Just have
Okay.
it.
I'm gonna stop the recording now. Nobody.
So now you can say like, really, since you stopped the recording.